growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all? This is the very reason why everyone who originally worked on and set up Invictus no longer works.
Nobody saw this coming. Not the donors, not the insiders, and definitely not the thousands of people who believed Archewell Foundation was one of the most trusted charitable organizations in the country. But what if everything you thought you knew was wrong? What if the smiling photos, the carefully crafted speeches, and the glamorous public appearances were hiding a completely different story behind closed doors? A story involving missing answers. A story involving millions of dollars. And a story that has left even longtime supporters asking one chilling question: what exactly was happening inside Archewell Foundation? Because over the last few months, strange details have started appearing everywhere. Financial records, internal disagreements, former staff members quietly disappearing from the organization, and a growing number of questions that nobody seems willing to answer publicly. At the center of it all, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, two names that once represented influence, prestige, and public goodwill. But now, those same names are being dragged into a controversy that grows larger every single week. And here's where things become truly unbelievable. The deeper people looked, the stranger the timeline became. Dates stopped matching. Statements started raising eyebrows. And decisions that once seemed ordinary suddenly began looking very different. Coincidence? Mismanagement? Or is there a much bigger story hiding beneath the surface? Tonight, we're following the timeline. We're following the money. And we're examining a series of events that some insiders are calling the most explosive controversy Archewell Foundation has ever faced. Because once you see the full picture, you may start asking the same questions everyone else is asking. And trust me, the answers are far more shocking than anyone expected. The first clue wasn't hidden in a secret meeting. It wasn't buried inside a leaked email. And it wasn't exposed by a whistleblower appearing on television. It was sitting in plain sight, right there in the timeline, waiting for somebody to connect the dots. For years, Archewell Foundation presented itself as a powerful force for change. Every public statement painted the same picture: compassion, community, impact, progress. The message was simple. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were building something meaningful. At least, that's what supporters believed. But then something unusual started happening. The numbers began telling a different story. And numbers don't care about public relations. They don't care about carefully crafted speeches. And they certainly don't care about glossy photographs posted on social media. The figures simply say what they say. As more people started reviewing public records, questions began appearing everywhere. Why were donations falling? Why were expenses rising? And why did several key decisions seem to happen at exactly the same moment that attention was shifting toward other projects? Nobody could ignore the timing. 1 week there was excitement. The next week there were concerns. Then suddenly there were investigations. Not criminal investigations. Not official accusations. Just growing scrutiny from people who wanted answers. And that scrutiny was spreading fast. The situation became even stranger when former insiders began quietly distancing themselves from the organization. No dramatic press conferences. No explosive interviews. Just departures. One after another. People who had once appeared completely committed to the mission were suddenly gone. Some observers dismissed it as normal turnover. Others weren't so sure. Because when one person leaves, it can be coincidence. When several experienced people leave during the same period, people naturally start asking questions. What did they know? What did they see? And, perhaps most importantly, why did they leave when they did? The timing continued to raise eyebrows, especially when attention around Meghan Markle's commercial ventures appeared stronger than ever. Every launch seemed coordinated. Every announcement seemed polished. Every campaign seemed carefully managed. Meanwhile, critics claimed Archewell Foundation appeared to be struggling with challenges that were becoming harder to ignore. Again, nobody needed rumors to notice the contrast. The contrast was visible. One side looked energetic. The other looked increasingly complicated. That alone was enough to start a conversation. But then another detail emerged. And this was the detail that really caught people's attention. According to several reports circulating among non-profit observers, requests for clarification on certain organizational matters were allegedly met with silence. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Now, silence does not automatically prove wrongdoing. That's important. But silence creates a vacuum. And when a vacuum appears, speculation rushes in to fill it. Before long, commentators, bloggers, and online investigators were all discussing the same question. Why wasn't the organization addressing the concerns directly? Supporters argued that every major organization faces criticism. Critics argued that transparency should have made the questions easy to answer. The debate intensified, and the more it intensified, the more attention Archwell Foundation received. Ironically, the effort to avoid controversy seemed to create even more controversy. Then came the moment that changed everything. A development that transformed scattered concerns into a full-blown public relations nightmare. Because once official records became part of the conversation, the story stopped being limited to social media discussions. It stopped being limited to commentators. And it stopped being limited to opinion. Suddenly, everyone was looking at the same documents, the same dates, the same sequence of events. And many people reached the same conclusion. Something about this timeline didn't feel right. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe there wasn't. But one thing was becoming impossible to deny. The questions were multiplying much faster than the answers. And for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the storm was only beginning. Because the deeper people dug into Archwell Foundation's history, the more unexpected discoveries they claimed to find. And what surfaced next would push this controversy to an entirely different level. What surfaced next was the kind of detail that turns a quiet controversy into a full-scale public obsession. Because once people started examining the timeline more closely, they noticed something that seemed impossible to ignore. Every major problem appeared to arrive during the exact same period that Archwell Foundation was supposedly entering a new era of growth. Think about that for a moment.
Growth.
Expansion.
Opportunity.
That was the public message. But behind the scenes, critics claimed the reality looked very different. Questions about spending were becoming louder. Questions about leadership were becoming louder. And questions about accountability were becoming impossible to avoid. Then came reports from individuals who allegedly had knowledge of the organization's internal culture. None of them wanted to speak publicly. None of them wanted their names attached to the story. But according to multiple accounts circulating online, frustration inside the operation had been building for months. One anonymous source allegedly described the atmosphere as confusing. Another claimed priorities seemed to change constantly. A third reportedly suggested that some staff members no longer understood the long-term direction of the organization. Were those claims true? Nobody outside the organization could verify them. But they were spreading rapidly. And once those stories began circulating, public curiosity exploded. Social media users started doing what social media users do best.
Digging.
Analyzing. Connecting dots. Creating timelines. Comparing statements. Looking for inconsistencies. And the deeper they went, the stranger the story appeared to become. One viral commentator described the situation as a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Another compared it to a television drama where every episode introduced a new mystery before the old one was solved. The comparison stuck because it felt strangely accurate. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Then came another controversy: lavish spending rumors. Again, no definitive proof, but plenty of speculation. Online discussions began focusing on expensive events, high-profile appearances, luxury travel, and elaborate public campaigns. Critics questioned whether too much attention was being directed toward image rather than impact. Supporters pushed back immediately. They argued visibility was necessary. That public engagement requires investment. That successful organizations often spend significant resources promoting their mission. The debate quickly became heated. Very heated. In fact, some discussions became so intense that entire online communities formed around analyzing every public appearance connected to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Every speech, every interview, every photograph. every announcement. Nothing escaped scrutiny. And then came perhaps the most damaging development of all, the trust issue. Because in controversies like this, numbers matter, documents matter, but trust matters even more. Once trust begins to crack, every future decision is viewed through a completely different lens. Actions that once seemed normal suddenly look suspicious. Routine announcements become headline news. Simple mistakes become major controversies. And that's exactly what appeared to be happening. The public wasn't just questioning individual decisions anymore. Some people were beginning to question the entire narrative, the entire story, the entire image that had been carefully built over the years. And that shift was dangerous, because reputations take years to build. But they can unravel incredibly fast, especially in the digital age, especially when millions of people are watching, and especially when a controversy reaches the point where even former supporters start asking difficult questions. By now, the pressure surrounding Archwell Foundation was growing from every direction. The headlines were becoming harsher, the criticism was becoming louder, and the calls for answers were becoming impossible to ignore. But what happened next would transform a growing controversy into something much bigger, because suddenly, the discussion was no longer limited to public opinion. Now, people were starting to wonder whether official scrutiny could be waiting just around the corner. And that possibility changed everything. Because the moment people start talking about official scrutiny, the entire conversation shifts. A controversy can survive criticism. A public figure can survive negative headlines. Even a damaged reputation can sometimes recover. But when questions continue piling up without clear answers, the pressure becomes something entirely different. And according to several commentators following the Archwell Foundation story, that pressure had reached a level nobody could ignore anymore. Suddenly, every decision from the past was being re-examined. Every announcement, every financial move, every public statement. People weren't just looking at what was happening now. They were looking backward, searching for the moment when everything allegedly began to change. And the more they looked, the more divided public opinion became. Supporters insisted Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were being unfairly targeted. They argued that successful public figures always attract criticism, that every large organization faces challenges. That speculation should never be confused with facts, but critics weren't backing down. In fact, they were becoming more aggressive. They claimed too many questions remained unanswered. Too many coincidences existed within the timeline. Too many key figures had disappeared from the organization without explanation. And too many important discussions seemed to end before they ever truly began. Then came whispers of financial uncertainty. Again, nothing officially confirmed, but enough rumors to keep the controversy alive. Some online analysts began questioning whether Archwell Foundation could maintain the same level of influence it once enjoyed. Others speculated about future restructuring, potential leadership changes, operational reductions, possible strategic retreats. Nobody knew what would happen next. And that's exactly why the story continued dominating conversations. Uncertainty creates attention. Mystery creates attention. And controversy creates even more attention. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry remained at the center of the storm. Every public appearance generated new headlines. Every interview generated new theories. Every attempt to move the conversation forward seemed to pull attention right back to the controversy itself. It was becoming a cycle, a very expensive cycle. And perhaps the most dangerous part wasn't the criticism. It wasn't the speculation. It wasn't even the headlines. It was the growing perception problem. Because perception often becomes reality in the public arena. Once enough people begin questioning a narrative, restoring confidence becomes incredibly difficult. The challenge isn't convincing critics. The challenge is reassuring supporters. And many observers believed that was now the organization's biggest obstacle.
Trust.
Confidence. Credibility. 3 things that take years to build and moments to lose. As the controversy continued growing, one question refused to disappear. What happens next? Does Archwell Foundation successfully navigate the storm and emerge stronger? Do new explanations finally address the concerns? Or will even bigger revelations surface in the months ahead? Nobody knows. But one thing is certain. The story is far from over. Because the timeline keeps raising questions, the discussions keep growing, and the public's curiosity keeps intensifying. Whether this controversy ultimately fades away or becomes something much larger may depend entirely on what happens next. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the biggest twists often arrive when people least expect them. Which means the chapter everyone is talking about today may only be the beginning of a much bigger story tomorrow, as here we are, a timeline filled with questions, a controversy that refuses to disappear, a foundation facing scrutiny, and a public that seems more divided than ever. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this entire story is that nobody can agree on what it all means. Are people looking at a perfectly ordinary organization going through growing pains? Or are they looking at warning signs that should have been taken seriously much earlier? Was this simply a series of unfortunate coincidences? Or does the timeline reveal something much bigger, hiding beneath the surface? That's the question everyone seems to be asking. Because when key figures leave, when criticism grows louder, when public trust starts shifting, and when new questions keep appearing faster than answers, people naturally begin connecting the dots. Maybe those dots form a clear picture. Maybe they don't. But one thing is impossible to deny. This story has captured attention for a reason. And the debate surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry shows absolutely no signs of slowing down. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think is the most important detail in this entire timeline? The leadership questions? The public criticism? The departures? The financial concerns? Or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because some of the best observations always come from viewers who notice details everyone else misses. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive, investigation, or controversy everyone will be talking about tomorrow. Because if this story has taught us anything, it's that the biggest headlines are rarely the full story. Sometimes the most important clues are hidden in the details. And sometimes those details lead somewhere nobody expected. Until next time,
Keep questioning.
keep watching, and keep looking beyond the headlines.